an attitude. We need swagger, okay? Regardless of what happens out there. Doesn't matter. Keep your swagger.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome into the Week 5 preview show. You are listening to the 5-Hole Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Matty K. Sitting along beside me is my co-host, Jay. Jay, how you feeling, my man?
Oh, man, it's exciting. Week 5. Week 5, Matty K. Can't believe it already.
Yeah, we're starting to get a bit of a sample size here under our belts, which is pretty exciting for a lot of these players. And a number of people that we're going to get into performing both really well and maybe a little bit poorly. But before we do that, a couple of plugs to get out of the way. First and foremost, please give us a follow, Twitter and X. We're really trying to grow the viewership on YouTube. These things are being streamed to YouTube as well, so make sure if you're on there, you give us a like and a subscribe. And, you know, Jay, we talk about our Discord a lot, 2,700 members and growing. And, you know, we gloss over that sometimes. So I just wanted to pause there for a second because that's like a pretty wild number when you think about it. And like, I really wanted to put some context to it so we can appreciate like how many people we're talking about when we say we have 2,700 active members. So like, think tables of 10, right? Everybody's been to a wedding, right? What's the biggest wedding you've been to? Maybe there's been like 200 or 300 people there, right? Maybe 20 or 30 of those tables, right? We have 270 of those tables. So whatever you're into, other than fantasy hockey, which is kind of what brought you here in the first place, we have tables for that. So like if you're into music and concerts like you and I are, we probably got like 18 tables into that. Like you're into playing Catan, we probably have 7 tables of people into that. If you're digging triple IPAs and knit hats in August, yeah, we got tables for that too. Like, so come on and join us. It's free. Come find your table. We got lots of people talking about all kinds of things. Including fantasy hockey. So I just wanted to not let that slide before we gave the 2,700, which is a big number in the fantasy hockey community, by the way, a lot bigger than a lot of other podcasts you may or may not listen to. So we're excited about that. We're proud about that. And we want you to come and join us. So with that, I'm going to give you a very enthusiastic throw to some observations from the previous week and some players, like we said, that maybe had some slow starts.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Matty K, this list is quite long, and some pretty high ADPs listed here as well. I guess we want to first start off with Wyatt Johnston. You might have taken him in round 5, possibly even earlier. He's currently ranked 325th, and he did get an assist yesterday. So I do want to say maybe there's things ticking up. But for the most part, yeah, this is a pretty disappointing start for anybody who was drafting 5th round capital on a bona fide player who's in a contract year in RFA. Zach Hyman as well has had a really, really struggling time, particularly with the McDavid injury. In addition, currently ranked 279th. He's been drafted 22nd in certain drafts.
Yeah, he was high. I mean, he did get on the board last game, which was a nice start. You know, Leon seems to have put that team on his back in the last couple of games, and Hyman was involved in that too. I know they played Nashville, which was kind of like the battle of these two guys we're talking about, in Stamkos and Hyman getting off the schneid. I actually own both of these guys, so I was kind of hoping, ideal scenario, both of them score and they get off the schneid together. But, you know, Hyman broke out a bit and hopefully just continues to do what he does. But yeah, tell us a bit about Stamkos too.
Yeah, and I guess this is those scenarios where you really hope we don't rattle your players on any of these lists. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I was thinking that as I was saying it. Like, I have a bit too many players that are showing up on this list for my liking.
Yeah, and that's the tough part with these guys, where especially with a guy like Stamkos, he holds honestly very little, I want to say, dynasty value, even maybe keeper value, if he isn't immediately performing, right? In redrafts, you definitely are hoping that he comes true. There's nobody on the, I guess, even trading block that you would be realistically able to flip him for and gain increased value. He needs to come true. just the same as JT Miller, ADP of 12, currently ranked outside the top 100th, just alongside his teammate, Elias Pettersson, who with an ADP of 22 is also outside not only the 100th or 200th. He's 329. He's below the aforementioned Wyatt Johnston, just to understand how much of a struggle this player is having at the moment.
And I know, like, PD, there's been a lot of ink spilled lately over PD and his struggles, and we're actually going to take a little bit of a closer look on that a little bit later on in the show. But suffice to say, you know, all is not right in PD land, and we wanted to just take a bit of a better understanding as to why that may be the case.
Couple other names, Jason Robertson, also outside the 150th. Right alongside his draft is Rasmus Dahlin, who's ranked 170th at the moment. Now there's another player that is, I think, upticking a little bit, but he's still been disappointing relative to his draft. Evan Bouchard, currently ranked 79th, but you took him 20th. It's hopefully on the up, but with the McDavid injury as well, possibly a tumultuous disappointment so far. And I guess the last skater we'll touch on a bit is Mika. I mean, he goes through ups and downs, but this is some pretty stellar down, 236 relative to his ADP of 60. So if you took him at the end of round 5, you know, ticking up to round 6, he's not been producing that quality value. We'll just touch on a few goalie names as well. Nashville is really struggling, and that happens in net as well. UC Saros, I was checking his save percentage the other day, and I think it's dipped under 900 right now. I think it's currently 894. When you're drafting him 27th, that is some pretty disappointing territory. Jeremy Swayman, honestly, right now, he's trending toward that 0G territory that I guess some of us on the pod really espouse. Sergei Bobrovsky, Stuart Skinner, these are all highly drafted characters who are currently really I guess bucking that threshold of whether or not you are, I guess, diamond handsing or bag holding at this point. What do you think, Matty K?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at all 5 of those names, those are all in tier 1 or tier 2, possibly maybe one of those guys dipped down to a tier 3 goalie in a lot of preseason rankings, right? So there was a lot of high draft capital. This whole list is a perfect example of why somebody would fade goalies till a lot later in the draft. There's a whole list of players that look like this as well that are later ads in the draft that are playing just as terribly. So like overall across the league, save percentages is like at a 30-year low through 10 games in the league. So it's not surprising that these guys are struggling as well too. But in all 5 of these goalies cases, you know, most of these teams outside of, say, Boston this year, realistically, or maybe Nashville, like they're on top 10 cup odds lists. Like there's some very good hockey teams here in front of these goalies that are playing pretty terribly. So let's take a quick peek under the hood and get an understanding of maybe why. So through these about 10 games these teams have played, we want to look at some of the differences between like what is their expected save percentage versus what they're actually doing in the net. And we want to look at this at even strength. We're going to pull the power play out of the mix for right now and just look at what they're doing 5v5 and look at their expected save percentage. In this case, their Fenwick save percentage, which is just the regular save percentage, but you're including missed shots as well as the shots on goal. So we're going to look at their expected Fenwick save percentage versus their real Fenwick save percentage, right? And the difference, obviously, if they're doing better than what their expected is, they're playing really well. If they're doing negative to that value, they're playing pretty terribly. So poster child for the negative side of that is Alexander Georgiev. He's playing at a 0.37 below what his expected Fenwick save percentage would be, which puts him 65th in the league and second last on that list. So he had a Fenwick save percentage of 890. Right as he stands right now, and his expected Fenwick save percentage based on the quality of opponent and quality of shots, all the data that goes behind calculating these stats, is a 937. So he's 0.437 below that, which puts him basically at the bottom of the list. And Saros isn't that far behind him. He's almost 0.25 save percentage points below or to the negative. He's 58th on that list. Bob's 54th. Swayman's 41st. Only Skinner's around average at 33rd. Although, again, he's had some starts that weren't exactly confidence inspiring. So that's their save percentages. If we look at just their goals saved above expected, right? What was expected to be saved by a league average goalie in the exact same situation that they were versus what they actually did. This is at even strength for those same 5 goalies. Saros, second last, almost 7 goals to the negative, right? Georgiev is actually dead last on that list at just a little bit above 7 goals to the negative. And that's with the Avs actually allowing top 10 shots on goal against in the league. They do not allow a lot of attempts on goal, and yet he is just making them hot garbage. Bob, again, third last on that list. Skinner and Sway sort of in the middle. So we have some struggling goalies on some really good hockey teams. You mentioned a little bit earlier, Jay. I don't necessarily know if it's diamond hands because the draft capital that people spent in a lot of these players, A, you're not going to get value back if you tried to move them. And B, they're on good hockey teams for the most part that are just having poor starts. Odds are good they're going to turn that around to league average or better play, and the goalies are going to be a part of that. So I wouldn't say jump ship on any of these players. What it would be is just a very disappointing start to, in a lot of cases, just looking at the ADPs that you rang off here, like top 4 round guys, top 5 round guys. So, I mean, not a great start on the surface, and even worse start underneath the surface for a lot of these hero G goalies. Now, there's a few exceptions to that list with, what Hellboy's doing, etc. But there's a lot of high-priced goalies here that are underperforming. Now we are going to really move into some storylines, some injuries, etc., moving into this coming week. Before we do that, we should check in on last week's streamers. We had TJ, Raj, and myself all picking up streamers for this past week. Actually, we've still got tonight and Sunday in this week. So TJ went with Mikhail Granlund. That's a beauty of a stream. On the surface, taking a San Jose Shark might have been a little bit risky. He had popped a little bit before TJ took him, so he's not quite Nostradamus level here, but he certainly continued what he was doing. He had a goal and 2 assists in the first game he played this week. He's got 6 shots, 4 hits, a block in there. Nothing over the last 2 games. They do play another game tonight in Vancouver. I think that game just started. So maybe he'll do something tonight to add to that list, because the other guy he picked was Cole Perfetti, and Cole Perfetti did absolutely nothing. He burned some calories, but he got no points. He took 2 shots in 3 hockey games and had 2 blocks. So he, again, has Sunday night against Tampa to show a pulse. I don't know if that's the team you're going to necessarily show a pulse with, but that's the hand that Perfetti's been dealt. I just want to say, too, barring what happens tomorrow night against Tampa Bay, we were right on Nino. We talked about Niederreiter breaking out, and we're at the very end of that breakout, and don't get sucked into streaming him this week with the great schedule and the dual eligibility. And oh my gosh, he's only 9% owned. He scored a goal in the very first game, and then that's all he did, while the team scored 16 more in the next 3 games. So he's got 8 shots, 4 hits. It's not like it's a bad stream. It's just if you look at what Velarde's done over the past 3 games, if you look at what Ehlers has done over the past 3 games, I think it would have been the right move to stay away from Nino last week, unless you're in a really deep league and you got lots of options. So right now, TJ's hopes are on Granlund heading into Sunday. Raj, unfortunately, did not really get out of the gate with Zacha. The Bruins are still struggling, and so they played 3 games. They play again tomorrow. He has no points, 5 shots, a hit. Seattle on Sunday better be a banger of a game for Zacha. Maybe he puts up a hattie or something and gets in the mix. My stream for the week was Blake Coleman. So he's got 2 goals, 6 shots, 8 hits, 4 blocks. So he's been a banger stud. He's still got a game as well. They play Sunday against Edmonton in the Battle of Alberta. So I guess that'll be considered for the weekly title against TJ. You put up that Granlund line against the Coleman line. It's getting pretty spicy there. So I like my chances heading into to Sunday night, but I'm looking to retain my title here. I think I waxed everyone the last time that we did this, and then last week I wasn't on because I was away. So I kind of want to keep this train going. And but Granlund was a good pick, so that's going to be tough. So, Jay, let's take us into a couple of news and notes around the league.
Yeah, one thing you were saying too earlier, Maddie, when you were talking about the goalies, and I want to say that all those goalies that were listed of the five, I guess to reiterate for the listeners there's Georgiev, Saros, Skinner, Swayman, Bobrovsky, all of them struggling. One of them stands out like a sore thumb to me, and that one is Georgiev. Of those five specifically, Saros has the contract. Skinner has, I guess, Skinner I think is entering into RFA soon. Like Skinner's on a pretty unique setup because he was not supposed to be this good this early. He was supposed to be the backup to Campbell. But that didn't work out the way the Oilers were thinking. But it worked out way better with the way Skinner's contract is actually relative to their cap. Swayman's just signed the contract. Bob is on contract. The only guy that isn't is Georgiev. He's a UFA come July 2025. And more uniquely as well, he's in a state where he's on a team that doesn't pay goalies. If you look at if you just go into Puckpedia and check how Colorado divvies their cap for their goaltending, I think he is the most expensive goalie, and he's only on $3.5 million. So when you flip it like that and think of his contract situation, understand how the Avs are playing, understand like specifically what they are needing that goalie to do right now. They are not playing him for the long term. There's nothing beyond a mercenary immediate next 71 games. How are you doing? And if he's not giving them play, he's giving them nothing. They have no incentive to keep him if he can't perform. And
Yeah,
it's a
and
really
like they don't need a Vezina candidate. They just need like league average goaltending. And everything else will fall into place. I know they're struggling with depth up front, but again, they're not allowing a lot of shots, and they'll figure that out just fine. They don't need the best goalie in the league. They just need like the 20th best goalie in the league,
and
not the
pretty
60th.
or yeah, not the 60th. Pretty scary developments as well for Georgiev is the last win he's had is that 4-3, I guess, overtime winner, or I guess the overtime win, the very first win the Avs had this season against Anaheim. Uh, Notably, the Avs outshot, I want to say by like 20 or 25, and they still got to overtime because that's just how poorly Georgiev was playing. He hadn't gotten a start since, and Noonan ran with 4 straight starts, 4 straight wins. It looks like they're gonna need a bit of a magic rabbit to get this win against Nashville tonight. It's currently 3-1 midway through the third. But notably, Noonan has been pretty much like a big revelation actually off the wire. Like he's started, I think, 4 of the last 6 games. Like it's kind of a scary development as well for any Georgiev holders, and his ownership has just been plummeting. Something to monitor for sure, that crease situation in Colorado. Actually, come to think of it, Maddie, where would you stand if you were in that situation of seeing Georgiev, not getting any starts in play, knowing his contract situation? What would you have for the listeners for any of these developments?
I mean, with him, you're kind of into sunk cost territory at this point. Like, I really don't see what you could move him for. And like, who's taking his place really doesn't have any history of running with this anyways. Like they're in a position, Colorado is largely of their own making, where they just have to run with who can get them average to above average goaltending in little spurts. And like maybe for this month it's going to happen to be Anunen, but like maybe for 3 weeks it's going to be Kakinen, and then maybe like resurrected from the dead is going to be Georgiev, and he's going to come in and maybe run for a month and a half. Like you just don't know. So I mean, he's not hurt, so you can't stash him anywhere. So it really is truly a roster spot. I think it would largely depend on how you're trending around him. If you've been able to build a quality team and holding him isn't sacrificing, your standing, it's just if I had somebody better, I might be a little bit better than where I am. That's one thing. If you're sort of near the bottom of the league and 3 weeks in is one thing. If you're 6 weeks in and you're still near the bottom of your league and you're holding a Georgiev, that might be where you start to think about, making not quite a panic move, but you need to start winning some weeks, and that might mean throwing a guy like him overboard.
It's a frightening prospect as well. It was so early for us in the season, but at the same time, think about all those leagues where you are in playoff pole position or even in a bye week. The difference between records with teams on bye and the difference between teams that miss out on the dance entirely is not a 5 or 6 win spread, right? Like I want to say 2 or 3 weeks one could be that difference between a first seed and a playoff non-bound team. So maybe those 3 weeks are these early weeks that you needed to win or you needed to, I guess, hold. So be patient for sure. Don't be patient forever. Some storylines and headlines. Logren on the Leafs. He's traded to San Jose and looks like here he's immediately running the top power play.
I saw that. Yeah, I think they traded Timmins too. Did they not?
I can't
Yeah,
dig up
I'm
the
pretty
entire
sure.
list, but yeah, I guess Timmins also there. Big question immediately is how does that hurt Jake Wallman's value? Because he was
Yeah,
already
him sliding down to PP2. I mean, he's had a good last week and a half. And I know he was being drafted kind of late because of the bangs and because he's just going to get a ton of ice as well in San Jose. I don't think those two things change that much. I mean, yes, being bumped off of PP1 isn't ideal, but I mean, he's still going to get a ton of minutes there. He's going to get opportunity on the power play. I don't exactly think, and I'm going to say this without actually going in and checking, but I don't believe that their power play time on ice is like incredibly lopsided. So if he's getting like 35 to 40% of the power play time, like that's still pretty decent compared to the press box that he was getting in Toronto. So yeah, good for him. I mean, I always just like seeing people getting opportunities, right? Obviously, he was sitting there. He feels he can play in this league. The Leafs felt he could play. They signed him to a contract, I think largely to avoid like arbitration. But still, like they signed him to a contract and then he can't play on their own team. So at least they were able to move him to something. By the sounds of it, San Jose was literally like the only team that they would trade him, like that was interested in trading for him, like one of 32. So
and if you look now at that lineup listed, Eklund, Toffoli, Wenberg, Granlund, and now Logren. I don't know, Matty K. This doesn't sound like the worst 5 combination of skaters you
yeah,
could
they
put
rang
together.
off a few wins in a row. Like they're kind of fun. I mean, what they've been doing is riding the horses that are getting them there. The Toffolis, the Granlunds, the Eklunds, like we're talking about. Those guys have been seeing really big minutes and they've been producing. The interesting thing is obviously Celebrini is coming back. And so, what's that going to do? I had this mentioned a little bit earlier or later down in the script, but like Celebrini is practicing, right? He's coming back to the team. He's probably going to be back this week, maybe when I say this week, this coming week. But like for Granlund holders like that, when Minimac comes back, he's probably down on line 2, which is where he was before. At even strength with Zetterlund, who's a good player, but he's not the 2-line 1 players. He probably will stay online on power play 1 because I think Wenberg was kind of up, taking that spot. So Wenberg probably shifts down. Granlund stays there. He may not get the 22 minutes of time on ice he's been getting. That might drift down a little bit with the actual 1C back. But again, Celebrini's super young and he might just not come back to 19 minutes. Right. So I would expect Granlund to still be super involved. He's great early on. So yeah, you're certainly not dropping him.
Yeah, definitely great value, especially with his dual eligibility as well. I don't remember seeing him drafted in many of the leagues I'm in. So yeah, this guy was a waiver wire gem. Speaking of gems as well, Thatcher Demko. It looks like the reports have said that he's 2 to 3 weeks away. And it was saying that despite all the rumors that of the lack of significant progression to his knee injury, it still looks like Canucks fans can expect Demko back sooner rather than later. So currently his return is expected mid to late November. And I don't know, I just checked the calendar. I think it is November, Matty K.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting there. This certainly came as news. I mean, ironically, we don't have Raj on tonight, unfortunately, because he would be like the dialed in expert to not only on Vancouver, but specifically on this topic to kind of keep us up to date. But I mean, all I would say is until we know something more significant in terms of like a date, and just seeing him play in net, whether it's practice footage or like just how he's doing and how he's coming back, it's still Lankinen all the way. Like Shilov's got absolutely pumped again on Wednesday against New Jersey. They've only let him in the net 3 times. He's lost all 3 of those games, right? He's allowed 15 goals on 74 shots. You can do the math there. Like that's below 800. He's a bottom 10 goalie in the nerd stats we were talking about before. Like Lankinen's 42nd in goal save above expected and 36th in Delta Fenwick save percentage at even strength. So he's like just getting the job done. He's not top 5. He's not top 10. He's exactly what the Canucks need. Come in and just steady the ship for the 800 grand or whatever he's being paid, 875. He's got a 918 at even strength, right? Just outside the top 20. Vancouver would have signed for that all day long, right? For the price that they're paying to have him behind the in the back end and between the pipes. So again, Raj can take another victory lap on that until Demko comes back. And again, I don't think he's going to come back and just be like, 3 starts in 4 nights kind of thing. Like they're probably going to ease him back in a little bit. And I think it's going to be Lankinen as the 1B the whole way through until he gets settled. So I'm a Lankinen holder in multiple leagues, and I will continue to be one until I see some great Demko play sustained. But
and it's a little, and I guess in some ways, should we really have been surprised? Because even in that playoff run, and I want to say there's some parallels between Shilov's and Wyatt Johnston a little bit here from last playoffs, where these are young players who were basically playing up to their absolute eyeballs in the ceilings, and they were doing amazing work. But in some ways, they both outperformed expectations by a long shot. I mean, Wyatt Johnston for sure. And we're seeing a lot of that possible regression or possibly just dip in form. I'm not sure either way. But Shilov's he wasn't even the backup in the playoffs last season, right? He was the 3rd string. The
that's
name's
right.
escaping me.
Yeah.
The name's escaping me for who was backing up Demko initially.
They all went down within 3 games. So like it was just
Right.
all of a sudden, yeah, he was in the A, and then it was you're starting in the playoffs.
And in that way, should we be entirely surprised if a 3rd string goalie plays a little bit worse than an classic NHL backup all the way? Lankinen has backed up Nashville for years. Maybe this isn't something we should be surprised about.
No, I mean, at the end of the day, the smaller the sample size, the wider the cone of variance that the outcomes could be. You start getting 50, 75, 100, 200 games under your belt, we can start to narrow that cone a little bit in terms of what we can expect. But if you played like 40 games in the NHL, like, my goodness, who knows what you could be, right? And just rightfully so. I mean, that's a good news story in Vancouver. We said we were going to talk a little bit about Elias Pettersson earlier in the chat. So I'm going to share a couple of remarkable stats with you about PD. So the first is he has 1 shot greater than 80 miles per hour this year. This was a guy who won the shot competition not too long ago and had like multiple higher numbers of that in 22 and 21. He also has 1 5v5 goal since last March. Although, if I'm not mistaken, he did get on the board earlier this week, and I believe that was a 5v5 goal. So if that was the case, he is on the board for this calendar year and this season. But you see where we're going with this. This isn't just a little bit of a slump. Like, this is a pretty remarkable drop in production. And underneath that, so there's some NHL Edge data that was shared about him regarding his skating speed and his shot speed. So like his skating speed is notably down, or something like 10 or 12% year over year in terms of his bursts. But it was the shot speed that was significantly down, like 25% greater down between what he's doing this year and what he was doing in the 22 and 23 seasons. And like, this is a known issue. The guy's dealing with tendinitis, right? And there's no real treatment for that I'm aware of. Like, I mean, other than I think there's some surgical options that could potentially alleviate that. But because he's dealing with this, like all in all, he's still PD, right? He still has the skill he had, 2 or 3 years ago, But this issue is lowering his ceiling until either like an improvement or treatment are evident. And we just have to expect that as fantasy managers, right? His shots on goal are down significantly, like over a shot on goal per game this year compared to last year. So he's shooting 1.5 times per game. How on earth are you going to be productive shooting 1.5 times per game, especially with the type of shot that he has? I feel his line mates are also a bit of a problem, right? I'm not saying that they're bad hockey players, but and I know that he's an $11.5 million hockey player and they're supposed to elevate other players around them. I'm buying into that to a degree. But like Nils Höglander and Connor Garland, that is not exactly giving him a lot of elite skill to work with. And I'm saying elite skill that can maybe help him dig out and gain some of the confidence back in his game. We talked last week on this podcast about confidence and how important that is in professional sports. It's this unmeasurable quantity that if you talk to any elite athlete, they know when they have it and they know when they don't have it. And it affects their production so much. So it's this incredibly wild variable that we have to play with as fantasy GMs. And Petey just quite frankly is not exhibiting any confidence in his game. Not in the way he skates, not in the way he shoots, not in the way he carries himself, not in the way he talks to the media. I'm not saying he's a bad person. He's just dealing with something physically and mentally. And until we see signs that he's coming through that, it's going to be difficult to own him, I think. And so he's going to pop at times. Like we might see a stretch of games coming up where he does elevate his play. What we need to see is a consistent elevation of his play. And that's just something we haven't seen yet. So a little bit concerning about PD. Yeah.
That's really, really frightening. I think specifically like listing out that the actual nagging injury that was following him, right? Like when you mentioned tendonitis as well, there's the immediate thought coming to mind as well with, I guess, not just following hockey, but even like I'm sure some of our other listeners as well follow basketball. The big name, Kawhi Leonard, that won a championship together with the Raptors as well all those years back. Yeah, there were also tendonitis issues and concerns, and the big one is simply that he rested the pretty much like every second leg of a back-to-back. And even during the playoff run, when they played their way to the Raptors 16 wins in the playoffs, he was still saying and complaining about injuries, even with a hugely reduced regular season workload. And when you think and compare injury to injury, obviously different players and professionals will recover in different ways, but Kawhi Leonard, clearly, if for any other person that follows and listens, he's not recovered at all. Even years later, every team that has signed him since has said that has been it's a sinking ship, right? It's a ship that doesn't come successfully along with professional play, where you need that player, specifically a star player, to perform. And when you think about Pettersson, he's already, so to speak, on a team that has other superstars that can sort of shield that pressure, right? Like he
Yeah,
isn't
he just
that.
doesn't play with any of them, unfortunately. But like I honestly like I believe he's going to find a way to play himself into relevance again. He had a decent point total in the last year as well too. I mean, the difference is that just we have to adjust our expectation of what he's going to do each week. And because you invested the draft capital you did in a player like him, I think what you have to do is take a look at the roster around you and just think, what am I not getting from Pettersson? And maybe I won't get from Pettersson throughout the rest of the season, and where do I need to add around my roster to bolster that? Because it might not have been something that you thought about when you originally constructed, the group of people that you have. But now that you're not getting quite as much of X and Y from him, it might mean I need to make a trade that I wasn't anticipating I need to make because I need more power play points or I need more shots on goal or whatever the case may be. That you were expecting to get from PD, that if you do end up getting, fantastic. But like, you got to be an active GM. There's one thing, like, we can't confuse like being passive and versus like just waiting for a player to see if they're going to turn it around. You can actively manage around a slump, and you need to do that because there's more than one potential outcome. The player might not come back out of that, in which case you've done nothing to prepare your roster for it. So
It's
yeah,
it's close. It's close to the idea, I guess, the duality or the double-edged sword, right? Where you can definitely be too impatient and end up being the person that drops Zach Hyman week one. But you could equally be too patient and repeat that 22-23 Huberto season. It's entirely possible on both ends. And unfortunately, as fantasy managers, we won't know which end that turns out to be until hindsight is 2020, and it's honestly far too late.
Yeah, you got to manage around it until you can't manage around it anymore. And then at that point, you're going to have to make a decision. And everybody's team's going to be different, right?
He's currently ranked 307th in one of
Yeah.
my
I mean, I
leagues.
feel like we got the bat out smashing the dead horse here. Like, we know he's not playing well, right? We understand a bit why. But I think as a manager, hold on to him. Try to bolster around him. Again, there's lots of players on the move right now. So maybe there's somebody that you can grab that will help, bring a little bit of what you're not getting from him. One guy that looks like they may have actually returned a little bit, get your take on this in just a moment, Jay, is Tage Thompson. So we talked a little bit, probably 2 weeks ago, on how the Buffalo offense was just stagnating. And they still had a bit of a tough start, certainly on the power play, but they have rebounded a little bit. And one guy that's been, the benefactor of that is Tage Thompson. So he's got 7 goals and 6 assists this year. They've played 11 games. So, and he's got 31 shots on goal. So a little under 3 shots a game, 2.8. But he's pacing for 97 points, including 52 goals. So his banner season, not last year, the year before, he went 47 and 47. Now, underneath the hood, those seasons look a little bit different. So this year, he's only got 2 power play points so far and no power play goals. That previous season, he had like 20 power play points, right? If not more. Shot volume is significantly down. He was in the 3.5 to 3.8 range in those previous 2 years, and this year he's 2.8, so like upwards of a full shot a game. In saying that, his shooting percentage is way up. So he's like a career 13% shooter. He's shooting 22% this year. Even in his big years, 15 and 16, he was like 15%, 15.5%, 12% shooter in 23. So 22 is a little spicy right now for him. He's taking less shots and converting on more of them. So kind of the opposite of sustainability. But he's shooting 14% on 5v5, which is really high. But his IPP is consistent. His power play IPP is consistent with previous years. So none of that's alarming. My thought here is, even if the 5v5 production cools down a little bit, if that power play rebounds even a bit, like I'm talking, if Buffalo can get themselves to, I don't know, above the bottom 10 power play, mid-league, then that would offset, a bit of natural cooling off in some of that 5v5 production, where he could absolutely sustain, an 80 to 90 point pace, and certainly, 40 plus goals is not out of the equation. I don't think he's going to shoot at 22% of the entire year. Again, production can stay irrational a lot longer than we expect it to. But even if he drifts down a little bit, what we want to see is, I think, a little bit more consistency in what he's shooting on net. If we start to see that, then I would be very happy with what I got from Tage Thompson so far. What are you thinking?
Yeah, no, I would way rather be in the state where he's scoring 5v5 and struggling to score on the power play than inverted and be functionally just a power play merchant. That is extremely positive to hear. Thinking especially with such a stacked and studded power play as well, like that. Hopefully it doesn't repeat what Pittsburgh did last season. But like that power play should come alive, and Tage honestly should be the main part of making it so.
All right, I think we got a couple injuries here to get into before we move into some tips and really dig into the schedule for next week and look at some optimal teams to stream from. So I'll start it off here. We got Matty Barzal, unfortunately, on the IR. We've talked about how inept that Islanders offense has been this year. They showed a couple of signs of life earlier this week with I think they had the optimal schedule, if not one of the top 2 or 3. And they rewarded some fantasy holders there. But Matt Barzal, unfortunately, is out 4 to 6 weeks. He's on IR. I believe that was upper body. So by the looks of it, Peugeot is up on line 1, taking his place. I don't think anything else changes there because Barzell, if I'm not mistaken, was briefly moved off of power play 1. I think he went back up to power play 1. So I'm not quite sure how that shook out in terms of who took his place. Jay, do you know anybody on there?
I think you got it. I think it is Pajot. I'm pretty
In
sure
both
it
spots?
was.
Okay.
Well, I think it was because if we're rattling off their power play 1, I think it's what Nelson, Dobson, Paul
Horvat.
Mary, and Barzal, and who's the
And
missing
Horvat.
player?
Yeah. So Barzell,
yeah.
somebody's taken Barzell's spot.
Yeah. So it's got, I think Pajot just slides into his position, specifically on that power
You're right,
play
because
1.
Lee's on there as well. So Lee's the 5th, and he's
Lee
Pajot's up
rotates.
there. Yep.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, I think the sucky part there too is it's not like Matt was really producing in that time period as well. I think that team is struggling to score in
At least I
general.
can stash him somewhere now. I own him in the listener league, and he's been quite honestly, he's been probably my worst performing player that I drafted. Not that I spent a huge amount of draft capital on him, but still. But what do you do with him, right? You don't want to drop him, especially since I knew the schedule was pretty good in the kind of the first few weeks here. So just hold on, cold start. At least now I can stash him in the IR, but.
Now, would you advise even any other owners to pick up Pajot, or would you say steer clear of that team and try to see if you can sneak value elsewhere?
I mean, we'll get into what that schedule looks like over the coming week, but I don't think their schedule is anything really to write home about. Like, they don't really have they have like no off nights next week. So yeah, I don't think there's any reason why you have to hold on to, Islanders unless they're part of the core of your team. Like, you're not dropping Dobson or somebody like that. But I mean, Barzell, this is going to be an IR drop for me.
100%. Speaking of which, though, fun teams with injuries not going away, but injuries, I guess, with returnees. Arturi Lehkonen said he's back. Obviously, in the game, haven't seen how he was deployed or his breakdown in this game. I can't imagine they'd throw him immediately with 20 odd minutes out on his first shift back. But certainly for sure, that team. I was glancing around at the Avs sub the other day, and they were jokingly saying it was the Eagle-anche, with just how depleted their forward core was. I think they were saying 1.6 of their 9 starting forwards were injured. So that's a horribly depleted team that is not also having its crease sorted out. Glad to have Arturi Lehkonen back. Still with an injury is Freddie Anderson. He remains week to week. And I do agree with you, Matty K. I guess the Comet has returned for its
Yeah, that's right.
viewing.
Semi-annual. We're due for a Comet sighting. We mentioned that a few weeks back. So there we are, Freddie Anderson.
Yeah.
Usually early spring, we'll see one of those two. Nice guy. God love him. But that Comet's not wrong.
He just finds it hard to stay healthy. And I think managers realize that too. Peter Kochetkov is already, I think, 78% owned last I checked. I think it's now like trending upwards past 80. There's no real pickup aside from Kochetkov. Hopefully you get him if you're still in one of the leagues remaining where he isn't. And we mentioned Macklin Celebrini again. But yeah, like it's exciting when injured players return shortly and then can immediately produce. It makes the league better for what it is.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of moves us into a couple of our tips for this week. So I'm going to start us off here. We've got a very interesting setup for the fantasy week. We got really heavy days, and we have really light days. So we're probably going to be holding players for really short periods of time, 1-2 games at the most this week if you're streaming them in and out. So you really want to narrow the aperture for their performance when you're looking at who to pick up. So if we're talking about picking up a player for like 1 to 2 games, I want who is the most unsustainably doing anything, staying in the most flaming hot of flames. Nerd stats be damned. I just want the person that's doing the thing absolutely right now. I don't care what the deployment is because I'm only going to have them for 1 game. If we're talking about like a 1 to 2 week streamer, now we're getting a little, we're talking maybe 3, 4, 5 games. And if that's what we're going to be seeing, very different story. I want to see a little bit of consistency here. I want to see some deployment that would justify taking up a roster spot for, a couple weeks of the season. They're going to have a good schedule as well to go alongside that. So there's a lot more criteria that go into it. compared to when we're talking about just fitting a guy in for like one game, right? If we're talking about somebody we're going to fit in for 1 to 2 months or maybe like a season long, now we need to see whatever that initial spark was, like sustained. The deployment, the production. Unfortunately, these situations are usually injury related. So somebody that had fantastic deployment and opportunity goes down, and the person that takes their place, kind of stays there. So keep an eye on that when we move throughout the season. But on a week like this, when we're talking about picking up guys for 1, maybe 2 games, look for who is doing it right now, not who's done it last year or who has the potential to do it. Like, who is doing it right now.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize that importance of the off night this particular week 5. It's always true that you want off night production and play, but specifically this week, if you are looking at some of the heavy nights, for example, like Thursday, week 5 Thursday, week 5 Saturday, 12 games, right? So 24 teams playing on both of those nights. If you combined every off night game in total, that is just 12 games in total across the week. Just again, another plug for any fantasy hockey players and managers that might be segueing from, let's say, a fantasy football mindset. In fantasy football, you want what we call handcuffs. You want what we call a deep bench. You want all those things that basically can produce an equivalent scoreline on your bench. And if any guy gets injured on your main roster, he slots in. Fantasy hockey is almost the direct opposite of that. You want to set up your team so that you have a completely empty bench and a completely full roster, if possible, every single game night of that game week. It's a really, really different mindset and shift. But think of from the perspective of Bangers League third liner doesn't even get power play minutes. I would rather him playing on every off night of that week doing something than I would rather 2 bona fide centers in which I can only play one and they only play on the heavy nights. That is the mindset you have and need to have when it comes to your schedule breakdowns. So let's dive into a couple of these teams. In terms of in terms of the strategies that Matty K was mentioning before as well, it also depends on which ads and how many ads you have available in your specific league. I think the most extreme case I've heard before, Matty K mentioned there was a league in which he was operating with 2 ads per week.
Yeah, I still am in that league. Yeah, so it's again short benches too, but yeah, with 2 ads, you're basically talking 1 streamer spot, and a lot of times I'm just trying to maximize games played with that player throughout a week. That might look just like this, right? Where we've got really heavy nights and not a lot of options on the off nights.
And further, that includes a potential injury that may or may not happen, knock on wood, and that doesn't happen to your team. What happens if you stream on Monday and then it turns out injuries happen on Thursday? You need to bake those contingencies in. So figure out how many ads you have available. Many leagues that I understand operate between the 3 and 4 ad categories. Like most of the times, those are the ranges I see. So what you want in this league, this particular week in week 5, is to target any teams that play on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. No teams play all of those days at the same time, unfortunately. So you will have to choose, I would say, keel toward early week off nights to give yourselves the options for potentially, I guess, shifting course midway through the week, as opposed to lining up all your games on Sunday. It just doesn't give you that sort of flexibility. Now we're recording this on Saturday.
There's opportunity here too, right, Jay? Before we really get into like all these individual teams that we can go at, there's no one silver bullet team here. It's not like you have to have players from these 2 teams, and if you don't have those 2 teams, you're not going to get anybody in. There's a handful of teams that have a few off nights. There's a handful more that have 1, and there's a whole bunch that have none, which kind of don't really have any streaming value to you whatsoever. So there really is a kind of a concentrated list of teams we can focus on, which is kind of exciting. right? We're probably gonna have to go a little bit deeper on those teams than we would have on a week like last week, where every day was like 7, 8, 9, 8, 7 games, meaning you're gonna have good players on all the teams that you can play. This week, exact opposite. You're gonna have a handful of teams and maybe have to go into the stinkier parts of the roster to maximize those games played. So let's hear it.
Yeah, so let's roll straight from, I guess, like through the weeks. The first one is I read online about this option, and it does make a lot of sense because it doesn't happen every week, but it actually happens to work for the week 4 rolling into week 5. There is a carryover streamable team this week. That is the Edmonton Oilers. We're recording this on Saturday, which means when this comes out on Sunday, you can possibly pick up an Edmonton player and they will play the week 4 Sunday, week 5 Monday back to back, which means you get a free game using a free week 4 stream, should you have such streams available. Now, given that Edmonton is the only team, I did do the dirty work to try to see available players on Edmonton, and wow, would you be surprised that not much exists. It's deep in the shitter, the way Matty K was mentioning. However, back-to-backs present unique opportunities in the crease. So I would say probably Calvin Pickard. Battle of Alberta happens on Sunday. So whenever they're facing Jersey, I'd imagine the Battle of Alberta takes Skinner off the table, opening up Pickard for a unique goalie stream early in the week. Free goalie stream functionally if you have a week 4 ad saved up. I don't know if there are valuable skaters elsewhere. You're really looking to see if Podkolzin can do something in terms of fights if you carry Pims, or you're looking for Adam Henrique to get some real upped
Corey
deployment.
Perry or something like that. I mean, I think even the Arvisons and Skinner, I mean, those players are basically owned in any significant league. So yeah, you're going to be trawling pretty deep if you're looking for Oilers to stream.
Now, another team, however, that is valuable to remember is, well, the team the Oilers are playing, right? The New Jersey Devils, they play on Monday, but they also play on the week 5 Sunday. So they play both of those bookended, I guess, on either end of the week. And they're one of 4 teams that play 4 games this week. The other teams, in addition to Jersey, are Minnesota, Nashville, and the LA Kings. I would definitely say of those, I would keel toward Nashville and LA more than the other two, mainly for the early portions of the week. So you can get their games ahead early, and then further, you can segue and drop the players if they, are not performing as well, just to gain a games played edge. At the same time, I would say please consider some terrible team schedules to possibly drop in comparison. Now, rattling off the team that does have a really, really brutal schedule, I would say Tampa. They play 2 games. They play solely on heavy nights. The Rangers play 2 games only on heavy nights, as do Dallas, Florida, and Winnipeg. But there's also deceptively bad schedules. Like, even if you look at a team like Utah, for example, Utah, like they've definitely like heated up a little bit, but they've cooled down a huge stretch. They're playing Winnipeg, they're playing the Blues, and they play only on heavy nights, even though they play 3 games. Teams like these are also worth considering in terms of, well, look, if you have, for example, Nick Schmaltz, and you're in, a 10-teamer, this isn't necessarily a guy where I'm saying he's going to start night in, night out anyway. He might honestly be riding the pine on your team no matter what. And in that case, weirdly, Vegas, who plays 2 games that week, but only on the light Wednesday and Friday, you probably have more production coming from, a Barbashev who might be floating on the wire, even though he's playing only 2 nights, than you would.
They're tough holds too for that exact reason, because I mean, if we snuck ahead 1 week, Vegas has the best schedule next week. They play 4 games, 4 off nights. So you got to hold your nose a bit through this week. At least the 2 games they do play are on off nights. But I mean, if it's not the core of guys that are doing it, do you take a risk and drop a Vegas player and then try to pick him up Saturday, Sunday, maybe first thing Monday morning, like a degenerate. To
The 3 a.m. alarm coming in
that's right,
handy.
the 3 a.m. alarm. Never for the gym, but always for fantasy hockey.
Always for fantasy. It's a tough week. It's a tough week. But we'll mention off some other teams that have some pretty difficult nights as well. In terms of just I guess least games played. Boston is another team that is going to be difficult, right? They play only on the heavy nights, and that team has also been struggling a bit as of late. Mind you, I say struggling as they just, I think, carried a shutout today against Philly. But I mean, they played against Philly.
Philly, yeah. Philly without Urson, too.
Philly without Ursa. Speaking of which, Philly is also playing only on the heavy nights this coming week. So Philly should be an immediate consideration for any drop. Obviously not for the dynasty leagues and like, like any of the key players. But another team I would say like Montreal, for example. A team where you have your bona fide studs and then you have your rotating cast, like a Kirby Dach, for example. Like, I mean, he's getting power play 1, but will you fit him in every single one of these nights? Definitely one to consider. When we are considering, I guess, cherry-picked games where we're specifically just targeting a specific game, we mentioned before Jersey, Edmonton, LA, Nashville. Another good team to consider would be for that Friday setup later in the week, Minnesota against Anaheim. Minnesota is an interesting team to target where they have very winnable games, right?
Oh yeah, their back end of this week looks fantastic. I think they play Thursday, Friday, Sunday, and they play
right.
San Jose, Anaheim, and close it out against Chicago. Like, you couldn't build a schedule in a lab better than that. And not to mention, Minnie's been really hot. Now, in saying that, they're going to go like 0-2-1 or something. But like, just looking at it on the surface, that's the dream setup right there. Early week stream with a couple of the teams we mentioned, right? And Edmonton, somebody that gives you Monday, Wednesday.
Yeah.
And then if you can fit the Thursday, absolutely.
So somehow, if your schedule can include starting the week with Nashville and ending the week with a Minnesota stream, that would ideally get you all, I guess, play on all off nights and also hopefully get you in on the action that should happen between, like the fireworks that are going to happen in that Sharks and Ducks and Blackhawks game. Like, all of those things with a clicking Minnesota offense, I think that is, that should be brutal for, should be brutal for the teams facing Minnesota, I suppose. There are relatively fewer back-to-backs, but I guess just worth mentioning, Monday, Tuesday, you have Nashville and Minnesota playing the back-to-backs, or sorry, I guess LA playing the back-to-backs on Monday and Tuesday. On Wednesday, Thursday, you have Nashville and Chicago playing the back-to-back. Thursday, Friday has Mini. Friday, Saturday has 3 back-to-backs with Washington, Toronto, and Detroit all playing on Friday and Saturday. And the weekend back-to-back, there's the Devils and the Blue Jackets. So just it's tougher. I think sometimes we like to think of the silver bullet where we rattle off like the name, like, you take Connor Brown and he will lead you to glory. Just look for those specific teams and iron it out from there. What works in your league most likely will not work in every single league. Now, in terms of streams as well, we did want to cover a bit of the strategy where it's like, okay, with the injuries, with specific trends for the teams, what would a stream look like if I'm not just looking for this optimized week, right? So if you're going ahead for a month, the coming month of November, I would say ideal streams to target on teams would be Washington, right? They play the most games, they play the second most off nights, and they play the most back-to-backs. So Washington, especially with the hot team rolling through, I think right now they just won, was it 7-2 tonight?
I think they're 7-2, 7-3. Like, they're playing sneaky well, and both goalies are playable. Actually, the goalie that's the lower owned is the better goalie. So you talk about that with the back-to-backs, the most number of games, second most off nights. We're going to be talking about Washington players a lot over the next 3 to 4 weeks.
And it's exciting to be part of history as well. I mean, I don't know where Ovi fell in your league in particular, but I mean, you won't have Ovi available for you to snag. Trade target is going to be tough to get him too, but you can get all the peripheral pieces around him. Should be still, right? Like even Connor McMichael. Where was this center only gem before? Who knew, right? Like Dylan Strome just got picked up in a couple of my leagues. Like these guys that are producing together with history, helping him get him over the hump to pass the great one. You want to be part of that history, right? Like fantasy hockey be damned. You want to be actually part of that, rolling through. Washington is that team. Now we said second most off nights, and that's because they don't have the most. The most is Anaheim, and Anaheim also still is over the next 4 weeks going to play 8 of their 12 games on an off night schedule. Fantastic, incredible. And Montreal, I mean, so they don't play like they play they play 12 games, which is good, but I mean 3 of them are off nights. So
yeah, they basically 3 a week, right? Almost every week, they're 2 to 3 games are going to be on heavy nights. So again, outside of Caulfield, obviously you're playing. He scores like every game, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a handful of players, but aside from them being a core part of your lineup, again, the next 4 weeks, you start looking at every time you set that roster, and that player is always on my bench. That player is always on my bench. It's time to move them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you may have invested a bit of draft capital, or maybe not, or maybe we got a couple of good early weeks off of somebody you picked up as a stream, but it's time to cut bait and find the next version of that person because it's not going to be on Montreal for the next 12 games.
Yeah. And Toronto and Chicago are worth considering as well. Like you just have to go and check to see if they fit into your lineup. I mean, they also play 12 games, so that's 3 a week. But Toronto has 6 off nights. Chicago isn't even that much better than Montreal. They have 4 off nights. Chicago might be another team to target as well to see, like Nick Foligno is awesome. It's 12% owned. What if he can't play? So if he's not fitting into your lineup, just go check and see. So I guess just in terms of thinking, not just with, I guess, the ads, but then also considering your drops, how would a week particularly look like in week 5 when you're adding and dropping players? As mentioned before, if you wanted to do that strategy of doing the, I guess, week 4 rolling into week 5 ad. So let's say you're holding, let's say, Adam Henrique, right? So you hold Adam Henrique, he's played on Sunday, played on Monday. You don't need him no more. What are you going to do with him? And what you'd ideally want to ladder him onto is any player that's going to play the Tuesday, Wednesday back to back. It doesn't exist. That's the fun part. So in that case, you should ideally move on to a Wednesday, Thursday, or Wednesday, Thursday back to back, or a Wednesday, Friday off night. I would suggest probably the off night setup. So I would try to flip your Adam Henrique for a Vegas player, right? Like a Vegas player. Talked about Barbashev. He's pretty highly owned. We talked about even Dorotheyev, who is really lowly owned and is, I think, currently getting power play 1 time. So that would be an immense target. And they don't play after that Friday off night, but who knows? They have an amazing week 6 schedule. Maybe you just want to stop at there. Like, count your chick. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. Just hold on, and hopefully you can carry it through. But on the flip side, there are some other candidates that you could consider if you were unsure about other names in particular. We talked about Montreal before. Lane Hudson. He's
yeah. I mean, I think he firmly falls into that category of, again, if it's a core element of your team, Lane Hudson and whatever he's been producing for you, if you need to keep that, knowing what the next month is going to look like, and again, what's his value over replacement, right? Who's sitting on the wire? Is Jake Middleton sitting on the wire? Who's doing the thing and scoring points and eating minutes? Like there's a lot of people out there that can produce at an average level to match what your player is doing. It's really just, why am I holding this player? We got a few names listed on here. I got to be honest with you. Nobody really gets me overly excited. We've talked about Wyatt Johnson already. Adam Boquist, again, I'm not sure what he's doing, if he's good at hockey, bad at hockey. So the Florida Panthers certainly aren't giving him much of a chance to prove himself where he is. But like for Elaine Hudson, yeah, like I think over the next 4 weeks, there's probably a lot better options you can go with. I'm more looking at maybe some long-term ads. And again, we did talk Granlund a lot earlier in the show, so we can probably move through Granlund. You've been hitting that schedule pretty hard as well. Get you to have a little bit of a break there, Jay. Toffoli, what are your thoughts on Toffoli? 55%. We've been talking about a lot of Sharks. Toffoli, line one, power play one, doing what he does, right? Shoots the puck, scores.
It's a tough one as well with players on. Like, I feel like Toffoli has been that guy on multiple teams where the team has performed pretty suboptimally in successive years, and he just continues to get what he gets. And I'm starting to wonder at a certain point if the correlation is so closely linked, if causation's a part of it, is his play style just not necessarily conducive to a winning hockey team, so to speak. But it it kind of works to run through him, I suppose. I I think no matter what, Macklin Celebrini is going to need somebody to produce alongside him, and if they stick him and staple him to his line, he's going to get that deployment. He's going to get that production.
He's kind of done what Tyler Toffoli does everywhere he's played, right? He takes an above average number of shots. He's going to come in where he comes in terms of goals every single year, and he just kind of quietly does. He's like always there, right? 55% owned, perfect example. He's like kind of always there on the wire. Even that I thought was a little high. But we got a couple of long-term ads here that we could really look at before we dig into maybe some streaming options on a couple of those teams that we were just talking about. So yeah, Connor McMichael, as you mentioned, like center left wing, 22% owned. He plays line 2 with Wilson and PLD. He's on power play 1. He's got 5 goals, 5 assists through 9 games. That time on ice is creeping up. Started in the 14s, 15s. It's now around 18 minutes a game. His first 7 games, he had 12 shots on net with a little bit lower time on ice, as we mentioned. And then all of a sudden, boom, 15 shots in the last 2 games. So we'll see if that continues. He's getting deployment. His minutes are rising. He's got dual eligibility, and we talked about how good their schedule is. So I think Connor McMichael, if he's available in your league, 22% sounds really low owned, but again, those are probably 22% of fairly sharp leagues. So if he is available in your league, knowing what you know about the schedule and what he's been doing, I think that's a priority pickup. Tom Wilson too, right wing, 48%. I mean, we should all know all about Tom Wilson. I'm assuming that 48% is entirely banger leagues. I can't imagine how he's not owned in anything that counts, whether they be points or cats. But I mean, on top of it, he's got 6 goals, a couple of assists, 24 shots, 29 hits. He's even got a block a game as well. So he's playing 18 minutes. He's line 2, power play 1. That deployment's not changing. Caps have been sneaky good this year.
And I want to say too, like, check that crease, right? Like, I think Logan
Both
Thompson.
Of them. That's right.
Everyone's taken Logan Thompson already. He's not going to be available, but my goodness,
I picked up Lindgren. Yeah, I picked up Lindgren earlier this week. As soon as they announced, because they play, I think they went Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. So I wanted to see who got the Thursday game. To hopefully it was him, so we could pick him up and get both starts. So I was pleasantly surprised with that. They won 6-3. So they played somebody bad.
Montreal, I think.
Montreal, yeah. So it was a bit of a weak, average wise, but he got the win, which is all I really wanted. Another guy, though, in terms of thinking medium to long-term ad here, Petr Mrazek, 19% owned, obviously goaltender in Chicago. This guy is 4th in the league in total saves. Again, we could probably expect that Chicago's not great defensively. He's going to see a lot of rubber. 4th. If you're in any type of volume league where that matters, this guy should be on your radar. He's 11th in goal save above expected at even strength, 17th in that Delta Fenwick save percentage metric we talked about at even strength. He's played 6 games in a row, including today's start, where they beat the Kings. He faced 40 shots and they won 4-3, made 37 saves. So
and that was a brutal showing from Darcy Kemper on the other crease. And I guess in that way, it shows like the competition that matters, because whereas Kemper, for example, is fighting together with Riddick, And Riddick's been definitely playing his part, but I think they're trying to give Kemper his starts. Who is Mrazek competing with? Like Soderblom is not going to do
That's it. It's his net,
Mrazek things.
literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's doing well with it, honestly. He's Dostal light early on this year. Everybody's fallen all over themselves for Dostal, and rightly so. But like Mrazek, especially in volume leagues, he's rocking a slightly over 3G goals against average. And the save percentage, I think, is just under 900 in terms of just top line number. It's like 895 or something like that. But he's been playing really well, and he's seen lots of pucks.
He is the second bus. If you missed the bus on
right.
Dostal, he is the second one that's going to take you home.
That's right. He's the 101B that comes, 10 minutes later. Okay, so Jay, I'm looking at our time. We're an hour and 10 minutes in. We have some players we're going to talk about on a few of these teams that give us some good opportunity for streaming. We are going to get a streamer of the week pick on for you and I, and we are going to get the hell out of here. So I am going to lead us in here with a couple of these teams that we just mentioned have really good schedules, 4 games played for all of these teams and 2 off nights. So we're looking at Minnesota, Nashville, and the New Jersey Devils. So with Mini, they have that fantastic late week schedule. San Jose, Anaheim, Chicago, as we mentioned. They've scored 31 goals as a team in their last 7 games. This is a top 6 only team, ladies and gentlemen. So the bottom 6 falls off an absolute cliff. So we are really only looking at a handful of defensemen here and top 6 forwards, a number of whom are already really owned. So like who we really can look at here, Marco Rossi, 11% owned center, line 1 center, power play 2 center. He's got points in 6 of his last 7. Ryan Hartman, I think, just came back recently from an injury. He was playing on line 4 for a little bit in the return. As long as he continues to not be a factor, then Rossi's top 6 role is going to be there. I think you absolutely should keep an eye out for him as a stream with who he plays with. Jake Middleton, 31% owned on defense. He's eaten a ton of minutes. He's got 7 points in 5 games. He's got a 5-game point streak, like I say, going along with all the peripherals that he brings. So again, we just talked about Lane Hudson, like if you can grab Jake Middleton and probably get all 4 of his games in this week and everything he's doing for you, that's an upgrade to me. Jonas Brodin, a little bit, same thing. He's got 5 assists, which kind of surprised me a little bit, but basically he shoots and he blocks and that's it. He does eat a lot of minutes. And a real deep sleeper here, Freddie Gaudreau. He centers the third line. He's 0% owned. No power play time. He gets power play 2, about 25% or so of the deployment. He does have 2 goals and 2 assists in his last couple of games. There really wasn't anything before that. 5 shots on goal and some bangs. So again, if you're going really deep on Mini, you could do worse than Freddie if you have to go really far down the roster. If we turn our attention to Nashville a little bit here, we've got Ryan O'Reilly, 53%. So he just crept over that 50% mark in terms of streamer ownership we look at. He's got 8 points, 3 of them goals, 19 shots. They've played 10 games. So, I mean, that's about right. O'Reilly really struggles to shoot more than about twice a game. That's really not what he does. So 21 minutes of time on ice. He's on the ice all the time. Line 1, power play 1. The people that he plays with, he is streaky in terms of a scorer. So I would say based on their schedule for this week, if you can fit a center-only player in, I would say Ryan O'Reilly would creep up to be must-own territory with who he plays with for this week. I'm less excited about a guy like Gus Nyquist, 20% owned left wing. I mean, he shoots like once a game. He does have 3 goals on the year. He plays line 1 at even strength with O'Reilly and Forsberg, like we talked about. He plays 18 minutes a night, which astounded me because there doesn't really have much to show for it. But, I would say Nyquist, if you have the room for that. Tommy Novak is a step lower, center only, 2% owned. He's got 3 goals, 22 shots on the year. So, I mean, that you can work with that. Line 3, power play 2. He really doesn't bring anything perif wise. He's center only. So, kind of a deep league. We got the Lausannes, the Shens, the Colton Sissons for leagues that really bring the bangs or the perfs. So there's some opportunity there in Nashville. Anything get you super excited there, Jay, before we move into New Jersey?
No, I just dug into the comments like in about an hour later, and there's PT. I just want to say shout out some love to PT.
Oh yeah, our guy. There we go.
Yeah, I was This one is always a really good. I completely agree as well. Yeah, Maddie. I really trust this Maddie guy. He has a telescope so he can see the small
That's
details.
right. The telescope in the back there. That's it. You go out in the morning about 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning and just lay a whole bunch of tools beside your car and one of those jacks by the wheel, right? And just that guy, he's always working on his car, eh? You just like you got to set the tone for the for the neighborhood. So yeah,
I
very
love
very
it.
celestial here in the Matty K household.
I
Um,
love I love it. And then the other one too, he gives all the hosts all the love. Oh man, just yeah. Just Jay's the kind of dude who volunteers at animal shelters and shows up 30 minutes early to help you move and brought tie down. So
he's a
just
good
just
human.
some love from PT. Oh man, just check
That's
those
awesome.
comments.
Well, listen, we're going to go dumpster diving on that New Jersey Devils roster because, as we know, anybody that's worth owning on that top heavy roster has already been picked up long ago. But we do have some options still, right? On a week where they do have a really good schedule. So we can look at Dawson Mercer, center right wing, good optionality there in terms of dual eligibility. He's only 22% owned. He's got 3 goals and 4 assists on 22 shots through. I mean, Devils have played 14 games this year already because they had that Europe series earlier in the year. He's playing on line 1 at even strength. He's on power play 2, but he gets upwards of 18 minutes a night. He's on a little bit of a point streak here. He's got a goal and 3 apples in his last 3 games. Again, I like who he plays with. You're going to get a lot of those games in. Somebody that snuck up on us this year, Stefan Nason, center. Left wing, right wing, 34%. He's got 5 goals, 7 apples on 21 shots. He plays line 3 at even strength, but he is up on power play 1. He's been up there basically the whole year. He does only play 15 or 16 minutes, but that power play 1 deployment helps. And I think he's got 12 points in 14 games. So you can definitely see fitting Nason into your lineup if he's not taken in your league already. We'll take one little notch down. The quality list will stop at Paul Cotterland, center left wing. Again, darling earlier on in the season. Still doing his thing, by the way. Like they played 14 games or whatever. He's not going to keep up goal a game, but he does have 6 goals, 2 apples in the games they have played, 22 shots and 40 hits. So, I mean, he's doing exactly what Paul Cotter is supposed to do. He doesn't see any power play time. So he's only out there on line 3. He does have a 33% shooting percentage. So my guess is that comes back to earth at some point. Crashes into that Freddie Anderson Comet on the way back. And like, I mean, now we're into what? Like Eric Holla and Andre Palat territory. Like, again,
And I
I don't
do
know.
want to say for Eric Holla, it depends if your league is a face-offs league. I
That's
want to
true. Yeah.
say if there are those peripherals coming in, that entire third line is valuable for different reasons. Nosen, Holla, Cotter. I was even going to say with Cotter, if Cotter had been able to continue some production, he was going to be like Frank Vetrano 23-24 territory. The only difference I would say too is Ross Colton is another example where it seemed like this guy was just shot, like shooting up to the moon. We'll see where that injury comes. I think he's in a boot. I want to say like Ross
Yeah.
Colton. Yeah, it's a little
Number of
rougher.
weeks. There's a whole lot. We talked about like Colorado earlier there. It's almost like every week the outlook and the lineups and the deployment changes with that team based on who's injured, who's coming back, who just like it just seems like they're constantly in the blender there. There is really one team here, 4 games, 1 off night that we want to really dig into a bit, and that's the LA Kings. There's been a bunch of streamers from the Kings this year. I feel like we talked about the Kings a lot. And a guy that we've talked about a lot is Alex Laferriere. So again, this probably isn't news to anybody on the pod here. The fact that he's 23% owned is a little bit news to me still, because I feel like we've been talking about him since like week 1 or week 2. He's right wing, like I say, 23% owned. So 3 in 4 leagues, this guy's available. He's got 4 goals in his last 3 games. He's getting over 18 minutes of time on ice in his last game. He shoots, he hits, he blocks. Like, I don't really know how else to say this. Like, this guy is a must add in your league. I don't really care the format that you're in. Like, everybody tracks all of those stats in one way or another. So, I mean, if Laferriere is not owned in your league, again, right wing scarcity, if that's still a thing that we would, really be vying for here, like he kind of just ticks a lot of boxes. So, Laferriere, absolutely.
The thing with LaFerriere as well is I hold him in certain leagues, and the tough and perplexing part with him is he has everything, like everything about positive regression or whatever, like overshooting, so to speak, like overshooting expectation. Everything seems baked in. He's scoring 4 goals in his last 3 games, and he's not shooting like 8 or 9 times and getting these goals. He's just literally sniping game per game. It feels unsustainable, but again, as Matty K said, right into the flames. Like this is exactly the kind of stream where you're saying, I want to see if you can sustain a 40% conversion clip and how long can you do it. This schedule is exactly the setup to see. And further, I think the 23% was belied by the idea for many that Quentin Byfield, who is currently on power play 2, was just a step, a smidge away from taking that power play 1 spot. But 10 games in, we have not seen that happen. And in another 10 games, if I don't see that happen, I'm just going to start saying, I don't believe it will. And I think this might be here to stay. And again, at 23% right wing scarcity, man, what a gem.
Yeah, I'll wait for him to show me when he's done on this streak as opposed to just betting against it or thinking the deployment will change. Yeah, again, can't say it any cleaner. Must add based on this week. Another must add for this week, Brant Clark. Now, again, slightly over. We've been talking about Brant Clark for a couple of weeks now. He certainly wasn't 56% owned like he is right now, but still, again, half of leagues, basically, Brant Clark is still available. If he's available in your league, again, a goal, 10 assists. He's got 11 points in 11 games. He's the power play 1 QB. He's got 13 shots over his last 3 games. I know it's a little bit higher than what he was doing earlier in the year, but like, what more do you want to see? I mean, outside of the fact that he doesn't really bring a lot in the periph department, if it's a banger league, maybe that contributes to the 44% of leagues where he's not owned. But I mean, unless it's wildly weighted towards the banger side of things, Brant Clark should be owned in your league, especially with the schedule they have. They do have a bunch of guys in the periph department as well. Tanner Jeannot, Joel Edmondson, Trevor Moore. Like these guys are 42% on Moore, but like most of these guys are available if you need to stream somebody in. So Jay, here's what we're going to do. We have got about 4 or 5 more teams to quickly gloss over. We're going to take 30 seconds max on each one of these teams. Starting with Washington, I'll kind of get us out of the gates here because we talked about a few of these players. Let's quickly hit on 4 or 5 players that people could look at on these teams that all play 3 times next week, but have 2 off nights. And we'll bring it home after that. All right, my man?
Hell yeah.
All right, Washington. Again, we talked a couple of these Washington players up already. Connor McMichael, Tom Wilson. We don't need to go over that again. Great opportunity, great deployment. They're doing the thing. If they're available, pick them up. PLD is also available. He's got, again, dual eligibility. Whatever you think he's going to be based on what he did in the past, he might not be that. He might not be what his paycheck says he should be, but he might be valuable to you for those 2 off nights for this week with who he's playing with. And he's had a bit of a spike recently in what he's been doing. Dylan Strome, another player, 46% owned. So he's right around that cut line with Wilson around whether or not he's available in your league or not. If he is, for very obvious reasons, take a look at his stat line. He's been producing. If Strome's there, take him. Marty Fevs on defense for the peripherals. Rasmus Sandin, same thing. If you need hits, you need blocks, a few shots per game. Those guys are going to do it for you. I think I did that in 30 seconds. Jay, tell me about Detroit.
If you need some points, go on the wings. You got Tarasenko, Comfer, Kopp. Comfer and Kopp also are dual eligible for center as well. It's pretty dire for peripherals. Like you're talking Edvinson, Sherrod and Petrie might be able to give you some things, but yeah, Detroit is mostly about schedule. Hopefully they'll give you something. Something is better than nothing.
Yeah, maybe even a net too. Like Lyon could be an option as well, depending on what the league setup is. I'm just trying to remember if they had one of the back-to-backs that we talked about earlier in the week with Detroit.
They don't
believe they do because
they do have the Toronto and Rangers back-to-back.
That's
on
right.
Friday, Saturday. So maybe there'd be some value in. I'm trying to remember their second.
I'm sorry, Jay. You're already over your 30 seconds. I'm gonna have to cut you off right there. Something about Jeff Petrie, and we're off to Anaheim. Not much to say here, ladies and gentlemen. The whole team's available if you really want part of them. Troy Terry, Cutter Gauthier, Trevor Zegras, pick your player. They're between 12 and probably 30% owned on the entire season. So if an Anaheim player fits what your team needs this week in terms of a schedule standpoint, and we mentioned how many off games they have coming up, we've said over the past couple of weeks, Anaheim as a team is in the I have to see it a little bit first before I jump on board. So I'll gladly miss the first car of the Anaheim train out of the station and wait for car 2 or 3. So just keep an eye on a few of these players as well. Bang Daddy Gudis for the periph department as well. That gets us, again, you're not getting Dostal, so there's nothing to really talk about on the goaltending side. Jay, take us over to Chicago.
Just want to reiterate, Bang Daddy Gudis is definitely an option at 27% ownership. My goodness. Chicago, though, there's tons of options surrounding Bedard. There's Teuvo Teravainen. Just literally go down the wings, right? There's Bertuzzi. I think even on power play 2, you have Taylor Hall. Ryan Donato was a really surprising value add recently. And Nick Foligno, right? Still getting that stapled power play 1 and line 1 deployment. And again, as we mentioned, Peter Mrazek is always worth a considered stream. But yeah, take it away with Edmonton.
Yeah, that's it. Not much to talk about here. Again, and Arvidsson, if they're available, 25, 26% owned on Yahoo. Again, aside from that, you're going really deep. You're going into Perryland and some of these players that are really far down the depth chart. So, if you're looking for Henrique, maybe Nurse is available in a Rifts league. He's, I think, 49%. Is that what we got in the sheet here, Jay? 49% owned on Nurse. So he might be available in your league if you're streaming and you need some peripherals. So I would keep an eye on that. That really does take us through the meat of the episode we were talking about today. What we do want to get on record with is a streamer of the week pick. So we don't really have anything for TJ right now. I am going to get on the board here, Jay, while I see you update the sheet there. And that is a great pick, by the way, that you have on there. I am going to stay in the Flames with Laferriere. LA Kings, right wing, 23% owned. All the reasons that we mentioned above. I have the word great schedule in here. Nobody really has a great schedule this week. There's a couple of good schedules. Again, 2 off nights being the max and the heavy nights being so heavy. Laferriere is interesting where if he keeps producing where he is, he might be sneaking his way into your heavy day rosters to begin with. So you might get all 4 of those games or maybe 3 of those 4 games, but I will gladly push my chips in on Laferriere for this week.
Yeah, so he will fit into so many schedules with that right wing eligibility as well, right? Oh man, that's a fantastic one for 23% for the listeners. I thought about doing the Ryan O'Reilly, but he's 53% owned, and I think he just skims the top where he's not really going to be streamer available. It's not going to help a lot of our listeners. So I am going to get out of that Ryan O'Reilly bubble, and I'm going to say this, guys, is just a streamer for this week. And I don't know if there's a long-term value hold or not, but we are staying with the Flames in Washington. We are going with the center left wing Connor McMichael. That team is just on fire. That team is 8-2 right now and atop the Metro.
If I had to pick a second, I would probably go Marco Rossi, because I really think that again, I love the mini schedule and his deployment's really good right now. So that would probably be a very close second for me. I don't know what we would have got from another a pick from Raj or a pick from TJ, but I love that Connor McMike pick.
Yeah, it's
Hard work, steely resolve, and
really difficult to consider specific teams in light of, I guess, all this different like the specific off night schedules. This team that's so on fire right now, you really just kind of think at a certain point they gotta come true.
That's it. I hear the outro music, Jay. Literally, we're an hour and 28 in. I love it. I've had a great time chatting hockey with you tonight. We got Tuesday Trends as the next episode coming up, so please listen and watch on the platform of your choice, Twitter, Discord, YouTube. Find a way to come and see us, and have a great night. Bye-bye, everyone.
We'll pick you up later.